Hey, you're listening to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
I'm your co-host, Mark.
I'm the guy, Billy.
Every week it's a new intro. Every week it's a new intro. I'm the other guy, Josh, and we're joined by another Josh on this episode as we kick off Surprise September. Now, the way that this new series is going to work throughout the course of it, we're going to do a surprise every week for you guys and integrate it into our social media. But before we get to this week's pick, we're joined by Mr. Josh Huff. He plays bass and backing vocals in a little band called False Sense. How are you doing?
Doing good. Good to be here.
Yeah, the longer we're friends, the more I realize like you're such a chill dude. And that's not a bad thing. It's just an observation.
Boredom.
Yeah, but when you get on stage, it's like someone just like unleashed the Hulk.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's hopefully the point, is that it's cathartic, right? I feel like if I got off and was that way, it would be like not working.
That's fair. So False Sense is a fairly newer project for you. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about what False Sense is all about?
Yeah, for sure. False Sense is 5 people. It's my brother Alistair, one of our best friends Kevin, and the 3 of us are also in a band called Hollow Light, which is a like a heavy metalcore band, let's say a knock loose synth band. And then we're joined by our friends Justin Klein, who's just an incredible drummer, and then Kristen Lester, who heads up the tattoo collective The Harvest and has played in a band once a long time ago and brought her out of retirement. And it really just came about because the 5 of us collectively in music and outside of it in the community just continually feel upset with the world at large and what's happening politically, locally, emotionally, and a lot of things. And we just decided to get a band together and talk about it.
I'm always kind of curious about bands that have siblings in the band, because I know that every sibling dynamic is different, but can you talk about writing music with your brother?
Yeah, for sure. I think we've been in 3 bands together now at this point.
Nice.
The first of which is Phantom Hourglass, which is no longer at this point, but when he joined the band, they needed a bassist, and he was like, hey, problem solved. Welcome. Here's my brother. And he is 6 years younger than me. And the guitarist in that band at that time was barely 18 and graduating high school, so I felt real old. I just show up to practice and there's a literal high schooler there, and I was like, what the hell did I do? But it was fun because we knew each other's dynamic. A lot of the music that he got inspired by was me handing things to him as a younger brother, which was really exciting to like take him to his first Warped Tour back in the day.
Nice.
So we were always like on the same page. And when Phantom Hourglass didn't work out internally with Alistair, there's this big grief about moving him on, and they were a little worried about that, so they didn't tell me. So it was a little bit of a surprise. But that's how Hollow Light started, is the minute that he exited from Phantom Hourglass, he had a lot of feelings about it. He had a lot of creative built up aggression. He had a lot of riffs that weren't right for Phantom Hourglass, and I said, you know what, let's make a band we want to make. And we made Hollow Light, and then we met the guys from that and rolled just straight through a 5-song EP in like a couple months. Like it was pretty much already written by the time we got together for practice. And that's worked out so well because, like you said, being my brother, there's this candidness with him where I'm music illiterate. I'm actually really dumb. That's why I play bass. But I know what I like, and I know the music that we like. And he can send me a song that's 75%, and I can give input to it that's both critical but constructive. And he won't take offense, or he'll know what I'm talking about, or I can say to him, no, you phoned that riff in, that I know what that's from, like you stole that, we need to figure out another thing. So I don't want to say like a creative director, but I'm just demanding, and he does it really well, and we get along really well. And like I said, our other guitarist Kevin in Hollow Light also loves hardcore music, so when we thought about making a hardcore band, it was just 3/5 of the band was already there. Me and Alistair and Kevin were already writing heavy metalcore stuff, and then we just wanted to pull influences from all the hardcore stuff that we loved and be a little bit more direct about what we're talking about.
There's definitely like punk values lyrically speaking, like classic punk, like, and challenging the the order or the structure of that we know kind of within the government or, definitely political. Can you talk about bringing in a lot of those classic values into the modern day?
Yeah, I think that was like the easiest part of False Sense is when we started thinking about playing in a band like that. We already knew Kristen and loved her as a person and just being active around her as a friend and a tattoo artist. And then, like I said, Justin's just one of the most talented drummers we know, and he's played in Americana and he teaches drum lessons and he's worked in punk bands, and they were just two people that I had never got to play music with before. So it was like a dream team situation. And that was kind of the beginning of the chat, was like, hey, what do you think about bands that feel this way? And you share a track from something like Kubla Khan, about a song pulled over by the police and how they feel this unknown tension, even though they don't have a reason for it other than their experience. Or just other bands like an incredibly amazing, aggressive, a new band out of the West Coast, Tsunami, which just really plays on this like pseudo tough guy persona and just really delivers just caveman like riffs and just really direct lyrics. And they were just bands that we all liked. And it was like, okay, like, how do we feel? Like, what do we have to talk about? And Kristen, growing up as a female in a tattooing space that is male dominated is a big thing. I mean, body autonomy and rights for everyone we know, like, we're very lucky that 4 out of 5 in the band are straight white appearing dudes, right? Like, we're very aware of how we're perceived, and then how people like Kristen are treated different, or friends and family that we have that have transitioned or mixed in ethnicity or different backgrounds that just share those fucking instances and those experiences that are crushing. There's some things in this world that just absolutely rip you apart when you hear that someone goes through that. And then once you've processed it, one of those steps is anger, and I don't think we ever really get to acceptance. Or I don't want to get to acceptance for a lot of the things that make me upset in this world. So the band is almost maybe that acceptance, is like, let's get together, let's play music that identifies it, let's talk about it so directly. You know what I mean? Because like with Phantom Hourglass and Hollow Light, it's really fun to put a tongue-in-cheek lyric together. It's really fun to reference something and feel like you're writing fucking Shakespeare. And you want someone to dig into it. You want them to read it a couple of times. You want them to really think about what it means. But a lot of messages can get lost that way. And sometimes it's nice just to write a song that says, fuck you. It's just really nice to write a song that's so direct and so literal, something that you really don't have to translate, something that might still resonate with people. So it scratches a lot of different itches in terms of creativity, to be clandestine, to be really poetic, to put on your thick eyeliner and mascara and write a really emo lyric for one. And then for the other one, you really just want to scream at a wall. You really you want to just drive that point home.
You said something that I've been fortunate enough to be friends with you for the better part of like a year and a half now. And one of the things that I always love seeing from friends is the projects that they're doing, whether that's a band or a film or a comic, and kind of seeing how that plays into their mental health. And I think it was like right after you guys, it was either the first or second show, but you had posted this video from you guys talking about like, just advice to anyone: go do a band with 4 of your best friends and just kind of go wild and just enjoy the ride. Can you talk about what this band and just music in general and an outlet for creativity to not only express these things, but the impact that it's had on your mental health?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's all the different bands that I've been in my time, which is 4 or 5 at this point, feel different to me. But when I explain it to like my aunt, I'm just like, yeah, it's just 4 rock bands. You know what I mean? Because like that nuance isn't there for her. But for me, I think creativity wise, everything is different. And you really scratch, like I said, a different itch with each thing. Like with Phantom Hourglass, it was really fun to create and work through like darker themes and love for Halloween and all these things that are a bit of a theatric, right? Like everybody loves the Misfits. And we never thought we'd go into costume because there's no way to work and it would feel inauthentic. But you love the theatrics of something. You love the cinema of it. You grow up watching cool shit. If you watch wrestling, everyone has a cool intro. And if you take that out of context, it's the goofiest thing in the world. How is this guy going to walk out? But in that moment, in that genre, in that space with people who get it, it pops off. It really, really makes a difference. And each band is different in that way. And I think the most uplifting thing for False Sense is that I've loved hardcore music for decades, and a lot of bands like Minor Threat helped me define what straight edge was and see if I was straight edge, you know what I mean? Things like that. But this is the first time I've played in one. So it really feels like going from a viewer of that culture and that community to a participant. And I think that's been all the difference. I think that's why it's so easy to recommend, is because with metal and metalcore, they were really fun, and they still are. And there's a lot of things in those genres that are par for the course, right? Like, there is spending a lot of money and a lot of time on producing an album and making a product, making something that's sellable, that's beautiful. You know, you're wearing an If Not For Me shirt, and those guys are incredible. They absolutely understand production and showmanship, and their videos are aesthetically pleasing. They've dialed in all these really technical attributes of creating art. And that's where Hollow Light is. Like, we want to be moody. You know, you see a new Knocked Loose video and you're like, holy shit, that's like a horror movie. I want to do that. But then with False Sense, it's in a lot of ways about just raw authenticity. It's really about the 2 songs that are out right now are a demo, technically. You know, we have 6 songs we're mixing and mastering with a friend now for the EP, but the litness in hardcore is to put something out so people know what you sound like, kinda, and then you just start playing shows, and you start engaging in the community, and you start playing basements and house shows and DIYs, and you play regular venues as well. But the status quo is that you can get successful in a very DIY oriented community. You know, that's where Knocked Loose cut its teeth, and it was selling out 300 cap DIY venues before it ever touched a national venue. And that part for me has been amazing because it's approachable, right? So with Hollow Light, you can spend $5,000 on an album that no one will listen to. And with False Sense, you can spend $500 with a friend getting a quick EP out, and you can play 7 shows in 4 months like we have. So it's just different genres, different approaches, different mechanisms happen in different genres. And I don't hate any of them, but I really, really appreciate right now the DIY and get it done aspect, to just do it, that the hardcore community is.
Yeah, it's as someone that's been getting more into show promotion over the last year, it's been really awesome to get to know bands, people in bands like you. Very is a big one. St. Pine Hills, Vilified. A lot of those guys have been incredible. You know, So Much Hope Buried, who we had on last week for Romulus. Like, you know, that it's really awesome. And there's like you said, like there's this really strong sense of community, and community in the right community is going to be could be a make or break it type of thing for your mental health.
Oh yeah, and I think that's the best thing too, is regardless of genre of metal I've played, most times the community is the bands at first. You know, especially when you play a 5-band show and 30 people show up on a Thursday night, you spend more time talking to those other bands and bonding with them and making those lifelong connections. And I think that's the part that maybe some viewers miss if they've not played in a band. Was it crushing to go to Richmond on a Tuesday and play for 40 people? I'm like, no, it was a lot of fun. And I met a lot of other cool bands, and I met people that I want to play with again, or we've played a new spot, or we've started to put in that time and effort. And I think that's always good for the mental health, is as much as there is gatekeeping in terms of monetary values in certain genres, hard work is never replaced. So as long as you're playing shows, as long as you're going out there, as long as you're networking, there's return in a bunch of different ways. And that's really satisfying to think mentally, I'm putting in the work and I'm seeing some type of result. You know, some people want to see it faster or more, but ultimately when you put in the work, you do see results in ways.
I'm really excited to have you guys take part in the first ever Say Their Name Fest, which is an incredible lineup, and it's an incredibly experimental lineup at that. We have Anerva, False Sense, No Treaty, Plead the Widow's Case, Wine and War Paint, Half Past Dead. Plus, we've got stand-up comedy from Chauncey Joe and spoken word from Micah Kimber, and this is all done in observation of International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day, which is an international holiday. It takes place the following week on November 23rd. That essentially is a day of recognition for those like myself and some of the other listeners that have been unfortunate to lose someone to suicide. And this entire show, to make it even cooler, is completely free. It's at Garden Grove. It's going to be November 16th. So make sure that you guys come out and support. Provide more links in the show notes below. We're going to take a quick commercial break, though. And in this commercial break, not only are you guys going to hear our special guest for next week and their pick for Surprise September, but also you guys are going to get to hear this band that we've been teasing about for the last 10 to 15 minutes with False Sense. This song is called We're Not Here to Cancel You. We'll be right back. If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us. Howdy, howdy. We are back. And we are talking about my pick for Surprise September is Speak No Evil. And this is the good one. This is the good one. I can't speak to the James McAvoy one because it's not officially out yet. But the sheer fact that they ruined the biggest twist of this movie in their marketing. Yeah. So I'm curious who had seen this movie out of the three of you guys who had not.
I didn't even know it was a remake coming out.
Isn't this a remake of a remake, or wasn't there another one before this one?
No.
Okay.
There's a similar title, but this story is new.
Okay. So I didn't see the other one either, but I haven't seen this one. Okay.
All right. So no one, Josh, did you see this movie before?
No, I knew the new one coming was a remake, and it kind of weirded me out that it was a remake less than 2 years after the first one came out. So I just assumed this one was bad, so bad they'd have to remake it. And it's on my list, and it never made priority. And then you said, "Guess what we're watching?" So yeah, I went into it blind.
I mean, in typical fashion, they had a movie come out that was kind of cool in Europe and jumped all over it because they have no originality in Hollywood anymore, really.
I am so curious why they remade a movie from another country that is in English.
Yeah.
Because it was only partially in English, probably. Or it was one that they figured people other than us wouldn't have seen. So they decided to remake it just to cash in on it.
Yeah, because with the remake, the host family is British instead of Dutch. So I think they're going to try to avoid all the language barriers with the remake.
I'm going to say, even with the remake,
even
with the remake, if you're going to watch the remake, don't listen to this podcast because I have a feeling they're going to be very similar.
Once I watched it, some of the parts in the trailer look like shot for shot. I was like,
exactly. Oh. That's why I'm saying that if you don't want us to ruin the new one and you haven't watched this one, you might want to stop now.
All right, so it'll probably come back up, but is there any other feelings on the remake that you want to get out before we talk about this movie?
I mean, remakes are getting kind of old. They've been old for a long time.
The remake kind of spoiled this one for me because the previews gave away a lot of it for me.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I read just an excerpt from the director for the remake, and he has a couple quotes that are basically saying that this one was too hard and bleak, and he's made a hard and bleak film, so this one's not going to be as hard and bleak. And then watching this one, then reading that, I was like, oh no, I know exactly what he's going to change. This is terrible. So I don't want to write off the new one. I do think I want to see it, but it's like reading the book before you watch the movie. Like, yeah. I have set myself up now for this remake to not hold water.
Yeah, I had that experience last year with Knock at the cabin, where I read The Cabin at the End of the World, the Paul Tremblay book that the movie was based on, and it ruined a lot of the stuff for me. But I appreciated being able to like read the Tremblay's book beforehand. But I am right there with you. Like I have a feeling, like I have very low expectations. Do I think James McAvoy is going to bring an incredible performance? Absolutely. He's probably going to be the only thing I feel like I have any sort of hope for. But I am with you, Josh. Like I have a feeling it's going to suck, but also at the same time, like I'm going to wait to reserve judgment until I'm actually see it.
Well, McAvoy has a good talent at playing creepy characters.
Yes, he does.
And I think it has to do with that like crooked ass smile he's got. That whole
That's terrible.
Am I wrong? What part of that statement is incorrect?
That's just rude. That's what that is.
I'm not touching that.
Now you know what you joined us for.
So I am curious. What did you guys think about this movie?
It was cool. I enjoyed it. It was a little awkward for a large portion of the movie, though. And I'm wondering if
I think that's intentional, though.
I know, and I'm wondering if they're going to alter it a little bit in the way they do the scenes to remove some of that awkwardness, because that's not a normal thing for an American movie.
You think they're going to take my full frontal nudity away from me?
Who knows? Who knows?
Depends on what rating they're trying to go for.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nowadays, like the MPAA, like you can show dick and like still walk away with that R rating. Like 25 years ago, it was like you got that and it was like automatically like an NC-17. I remember reading an article about a Ewan McGregor film from the like late 90s, early 2000s, and it got an NC-17 simply because of showing male genitalia.
Was it Velvet Goldmine?
No, it was like it's Adam something. I don't remember what the name of the movie was, but then 15 years ago we were all blessed with the giant blue penis of Dr. Manhattan, so it was a game changer.
He walked so Game of Thrones could run.
Yeah, pretty much.
So much dick and so few titles.
Well, Billy, I guess we were wrong about our predictions for Mark.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
What,
we
did
were.
y'all think I was gonna hate it? or
Oh,
something?
we thought you were gonna blast it.
Nah.
So,
No.
I mean,
it was just a little awkward, but I kind of like movies where the bad guy wins.
I love the movie, but like I lean towards a little bit of what Mark said. Some of the earlier scenes kind of were slow, but I think that's the way this movie was written, like a slow pace and then pick up to try to mess with you mentally versus like on the screen. They go through the storylines, they tease little things here and there. Because I watched the movie a second time a couple of hours ago just to refresh myself, especially after us talking to Leo over the weekend and then me having that aspect of what he told me.
Yeah.
So I'll hit on that one later. I don't want to jump on that now because I figure me and you, Josh, will probably hit on that. So
yeah, I went back and I watched it this morning after that conversation and like had that in mind, and we can touch on that later. Josh, what did you think of this movie?
I really appreciated that it was a slow burn. They did really well with the music scoring to really make a lot of mundane scenes unsettling. Like even when they go to see their daughter in the play, all the music is just bleak and a lot of string instruments and a lot of things that are like reserved for more of the graphic parts of a movie. And then towards the end, when there's actually some of the deaths, is one of the first times you hear like a normal song. Yep. And I feel like, again, that's all just trying to punish us and trying to like kind of flip the script on how we feel about it. Knowing that it was coming is grueling. And I think that's, again, like purposely and very intentional. And then as a spoiler, my daughter is 8 and their daughter was somewhere between 8 and 10. So it resonated with me. Not necessarily that I would find myself in that position, but you get a lot of empathy. Like when I was a teenager, I thought I was a serial killer because I liked to watch all the gruesome stuff and nothing affected me. And I remember after having a kid, one of the first like kid deaths in a movie, I was like, oh no, like I don't care about that kid, but like I can empathize now. And like that feeling of helplessness in the car towards like the climax of the whole thing, when it finally, what happens, is going to happens. You still had to feel bad for him. So, like Mark said, there's a lot of movies where I root for the bad guy. I wasn't mad that the bad guy won in this. I think it's powerful. I think it helps make an impression. But I definitely was like, oh, son of a bitch, it's kind of hard to watch him pull the kid.
Yeah, I'm actually wondering if that's going to be a change they make to the US version.
Yeah, that's my worry.
Yeah, that is another thing too, is that I really don't want them to change, because I feel like that's part of what makes this movie hit so hard.
Yeah.
And this was one that I remember hearing all of the buzz coming out of Sundance for this movie, and I let it slide for like a year. And I remember watching it one Friday night that my wife was like, gonna go do a girls' night out, and I was like, all right, cool, I'll watch a really depressing horror movie. And
I'm gonna do the same thing I do every night.
That slow burn, man. Like it hit me. And I kept saying, I was like, all right, when does it happen? And then there's just this shift in the tone, and it just makes you kind of see everything completely different. And having the advantage of seeing this coming into a rewatch for this podcast, like even the opening sequence where they're just driving feels tense, and that tension just kind of never lets up. And like Mark said, like sometimes it's awkward, but then you have these like other times where it's just like a tension for just tension's sake, and like it's just like fuck.
Well, at a certain point, you also realize that the movie could have ended a whole lot sooner if the little girl had remembered she had her bunny with her.
That was the most believable part. Like my daughter forgets things everywhere, and I'm like, if I die because of this, I'm gonna be so pissed.
Yeah, the whole rest of the movie wouldn't have even happened.
It would have been a short movie.
It's just the moral of the story is put your fucking toys away. Yeah.
Pretty much.
So, but I want to go back to something that Josh said about the music. If you were paying attention, like when they were on the ship or on the boat going to visit, it was completely opposite of what you were expecting of how the music that was presented. in a way, and I'm assuming, and I'm probably reaching here, but watching the movie like you're watching it in Patrick's eyes, that would be the bad side. The good side is when he was killing them.
Yeah.
I also kind of wonder if that was like an abandoned house that they took over.
Oh, I'm pretty sure it was.
Or
Quite possible.
if they possibly had gotten one of the kids from the owners of that house, because they made it a point to point out that he had no job and he didn't believe in work. So how was he affording this house in the woods?
That was what? How long after he said he was a doctor?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that's like the babysitter is Mohajid, and he's actually the one that takes the girl and assumingly probably sews her tongue up. So it's like he feels like a way bigger player at the end than you give it credit for in the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, because at the beginning he's just a babysitter.
Yeah, is that the bankroll? You know what I mean? Was my thought.
And then if he's involved, my question is how many other people are involved for it to be not seen that people are, because they had all those pictures. There's several families that have come and go, and how can nobody else? Several like walls, and how could they have not seen that, or neighbors not seen that, unless others are involved in this?
Well, they were in the middle of nowhere. They didn't really have anything.
Yeah, but still,
and it appeared that they were disposing of the people because there was a couple mounds of rocks around the two of them, and that I don't know what it is, but it almost looks looks like a quarry of some sort.
Where they're yelling,
my
picture in the background,
and he takes him to where he's going to kill him,
and he shows him that nobody can hear your scream. So him screaming, he already knew nobody could hear him.
Yes.
I'm also curious too, to bring up like one of the things you said. So just for credit's sake, so the music in this movie is done by Soon Kolster. I want to put that out there and give credit to them because they did an incredible job on this picture. But the rabbit kind of is also the reason that they end up like even meeting them in the first place. Go. Am I missing something? Did I forget?
They met at the pool. He asked, "Is this chair available?" And he gives him the chair. So that was the quick meet. However, the real talk meet was when he went to go hunt for the rabbit. Yes, and the rabbit showed that he would do anything for his daughter, that even though he was saying, damn it, he's like, I'm going to go find this bunny for her.
But my point is, and my question is would that still be the case if Agnes wasn't an only child? And I say that because I was an only child for several years until my sister came along. And I remember life before, how it seemed very like I was kind of like the light of my parents' life, not to be cocky, but
totally not cocky.
Not at all.
You ruined my attention.
But then when you add another kid into the mix, like you kind of have to split so you don't have like that spoil. So I'm almost kind of curious if like that also has something to do with it, and curious to your guys' input on that theory as well.
Well, it sounds like once your sister was born, you were the rabbit.
Yeah. I had to go back and get you. No,
go ahead.
Maybe
I was going to say it depends, because I know that there were certain things or certain toys growing up. Like I'll be honest, my grandmother made me a blanket, and it was a Pac-Man blanket. So if I ever lost that blanket, my parents were going to go back and get it because it was from my grandmother, and it was mine. And I'm the oldest of three. Each kid has their own thing, and depending on if it's that one toy that that they're going to be screaming for weeks. I mean, my kids were the same way. They're going to be screaming for weeks, or you're going to regret not going to try to find it. You're going to go back.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression, and you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Is this thing on? Hello? Can you hear me? Hello? I think I got it. I'm back, baby! Guess what we're watching? Because of this, and to celebrate my return, we are going to watch the worst horror movie that I think I've ever seen in my life. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. We're watching Human Centipede 2, The Full Cycle. Did I cut out? Am I gone, guys? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I was the youngest sibling, so
Yeah, Mark sucks. I was the oldest, so
I was the youngest. Everything was blamed on me, so
Well, I think that's
always my fault, whether it was or not.
when that's like the duality of the film. I think that's part of where like lukewarm comments about it come, is it's meant to be a social satire and a commentary. So knowing that, sometimes I try to suspend disbelief about like how it would logically work, because it's trying to drive like a point or a theme home. But it was written well enough that if there was a little goof like that, it felt jarring. Because like if the movie was just them being so dumb I couldn't wait for him to die, then I'd be like, all right, social commentary, they are playing like an archetype. But like you said, there's plenty of times where they act like I would act, or they would act logically in a way. So when they would give, like when they went back and got convinced to stay again, I couldn't relate to him anymore, because I was like, no, if I'm leaving, I'm out. And then they would make just like a very cliche horror movie mistake, like, well, let's just give it one more go. And then I'd have to go back to suspending belief because it's a commentary rather than like a logical progression. But sometimes it felt like it rode the fence. You know what I mean? It rode the fence a lot sometimes.
One of the lines I loved out of this movie was towards the end when he's asked, "Why did you do this to us?"
Mm-hmm.
His line, does anybody else remember what it was?
Because you let me.
Because you let me.
And that goes back to that scene that I was going to bring up. Is there's that moment between Bjorn and Patrick where they kind of have that, they go off and kind of have that, like, you know, beer, and that moment where they go screaming, and then afterwards, like, you know, he kind of confides in him about like how I'm so tired of smiling all the time, and he's just this constant guy that is, and I don't know if that's something that like he holds to himself, or that's something that like that's a standard that others hold him to where like he can't show any sign of emotion. And I'd even wager or even question if that's even a commentary on how the culture, because it's Dutch and Danish. I'm trying to remember
Right.
which one Bonjour and Bajon and Louise were. Are they the Dutch or the Danish?
They went to the Netherlands.
Okay.
We're all going to pretend like that helps, because I don't know.
So whatever culture it is, you know, it could also be a commentary on how that culture, you know, approaches the subject of men's mental health, and especially I think that's a theme that resonates for us here in America, where while it's getting better, there is largely still this stigma that if you show any sign of weakness, then you are not a real man, or you're less than a man, or whatever you want to say there.
And building off of that, and the question I have is, yes, Patrick's a psychopath, but what taught him to be that psychopath? Was it something his parents did, or something that happened to him as a kid that showed him this is the only way that you're going to survive, is you have to act this way? That is a very strong possibility. And again, I may be reading into it, but it's something that, needs to be said. It could have been brought up, or culture or something, that he was raised a certain way and he believes this is right, even though everybody else in society is saying that's crazy.
Well, there's been a lot of study done into like I can't remember the actual term it is now, but psychopath and sociopath aren't the proper terms anymore. And they found that there's a lot of people that have that trait, but it's almost like an exact mix of things that have to happen to make them like that, or turn them into Ed Gein, things like that. It has to be a combination of like constant abuse and all kinds of stuff, and then they become those monsters. But they had an interesting case where a college professor, I think it was, took pictures of a bunch of his students' brains, like x-rays or MRIs or whatever it was, to see if they could find the difference and spot it. And he wasn't told whose scans were whose, and they found one, and it turned out to be his.
Jeez.
And after they found out, he was like, so many things make more sense now as to why he had certain habits and the way he did things. But yeah, to turn him into a monster like that, it's a set of events that have to happen over a prolonged time to kind of turn him into a monster.
But that also goes back to my original point of what I was saying about men's mental health in particular, because we're taught that you bottle it down and you suppress things and you don't talk about your feelings. And so where does that trauma go? Well, if trauma is not processed and it's not articulated, then trauma breeds trauma. I mean, you look at history, and history says all of that stuff. To fictionalize it, we look at something like Rob Zombie's Halloween, right, where you kind of see all of the trauma that Michael endured, being bullied, being neglectful, being emotionally abused, physically abused, but all of that eventually ended up adding up to him becoming the serial killer. That's an extreme example, but again, it goes to this idea of trauma breeding trauma.
No, it's not as extreme. It is an extreme, but it's not as uncommon as you think when you start getting into the modern culture of crime TV and almost serial killer worship.
I'm aware. I've seen the fancy tapes.
Oh, Lord.
Well, I think two parts for me were one, it's a serial killing couple. So like we know that's rare in terms of the real world, but to watch it work and to watch them hop off of each other and gaslight the couple and play good cop, bad cop at times, all those things are really powerful because it adds to the believability that this couple does get swindled. Because like if you go out with one creepy guy, you're like, holy shit, this guy's creepy, let's roll. But you have a wife, you have a child, they have all this sentiments of like a normal family that would say, well, serial killers aren't this way. It like broke a lot of stereotypes that maybe you would see as early red flags. Like, I mean, even when they're driving back in the car, the wife is agreeing with the couple in the back. Oh, turn down the radio. Like she's playing good cop while he's playing bad cop to see how far they can get with the whole thing. Yeah. So I think that was like, it was more believable to me that I would get swindled by a couple whose whole goal was to do this and have been doing this than some strange guy that invited me out for a weekend in the woods.
And also, too, I want to put this out there as somebody that has been married for a long time. I am the only voice on this episode that does not have kids. But also, I know how hard it is for my wife and I to have couples that are also friends. That is so, like, when you get when you make friends with a couple, like, you're like, oh, like, we want to hold on to this, and, make sure that, like, these guys could be around for, a long time. And sometimes it works out that way, sometimes it doesn't. But, like, just even looking at it from building off of that point, Josh, like, that's part of the reason that I feel like it feels even believable was because of that duality that they have there.
Well, it also makes you wonder from a different aspect if maybe something had happened to make the two of them snap. Like, what if they had had a kid that had gotten killed or died at childbirth or something, and he's just doing whatever he thinks is needed to make his wife happy?
Or I'm building off that. Because I was going to say, what if they couldn't have kids, and that's what made them snap
Yeah.
because they both wanted kids.
Yeah, I was a little surprised with Abel, and I mean, again, it was still a nice twist, but how quickly they murder that kid for the next kid, because there's no lineage, there's no building the next serial killer. It's not a serial killer family at this point, and I think from like from a device standpoint, it's cool that they use the kid to embody all the trauma that the parents survived, and then all of a sudden you realize why Abel's such a glum son of a bitch. It's like, he's traumatized. He absolutely knows his family's dead, and they cut out his tongue, and he has to live with the murderers. So that's why I would cry every night. That makes sense. But for a while, I thought, well, like, why wouldn't this be the next one they're grooming to do the thing, right? Like, if it's expected to be a couple of two, I couldn't imagine if the kid was also in on it, how effective that is, how creepy that is.
And building off what you were just saying a little bit, when you watch the movie, I realized it the second time, but the first time, at the very beginning, you don't realize that's when they're getting Abel. They're getting him then, but all you see is a car scene and then them driving down a road. You have no idea what it entailed until the end, and then you go back and think, oh, so that's how it began. You got to see what happened before it happened.
And I'm also curious how like long, like what's the longevity of each kid, right? Like, do they kind of kill them before kind of teenage years when those more rebellious traits start to or defiant traits start to develop? You know, do they think they're like, oh, well, this kid's getting a little bit too close to potentially like ruining it? Because like there is that scene where like Abel tries to confront Bjorn. Terrible with names. Bjorn, whatever. BJ, where he tries to approach him, and you know he kind of goes like this, and it's not long afterwards that he eventually dies, because you do end up seeing like oh shit, like this is actually like what leads BJ into going through and like finding the photographs and like having that reveal to the audience.
I mean, I think it started to go that way whenever he was standing at the door of the, I don't know if it was a garage or whatever, you know,
Sure.
outside building, where they're standing there and he kind of opens his mouth to show him his tongue, because at that time they hadn't seen that.
Yeah,
And
that's the
then
same.
Patrick, is it the same one? And Patrick screams, "Hey, come in the house," or however he did it. So, yeah, that's the same thing.
I think they keep the kids until they find one that they liked better. And I think that really showed in the kids' dancing scene where he kept getting on to Abel for being off step and everything.
To be fair, he was, though.
Very,
he was phoning it in. Yeah.
I mean, that coffee cup went to the side, so it's so no, just kidding.
We've all been there.
So
But I think that's how long they keep the kid, until they find another one that they just kind of like better.
I also think it's I think it was funny just hearing Josh say that, because he's a musician, so he knows a little bit about staying on tune and staying on beat. But yeah, like I'm almost curious too, like what the grooming process is for them. Because you know, it's like what would have happened if, you know, Patrick going into the very beginning at the pool, like what would happen if Bjorn like didn't give the chair up? Like what would happen if he would have said no, like this is my daughter's stuff? You know, would the events of the film still have gone through as needed? Like how long do they study? You know, and is it because the photographs, it's kind of like their pattern is like boy girl, right?
I couldn't tell.
I don't think they really made that clear. I think it's whoever they could get over there to take their kid.
And I kind of agree with you. I think that if Bjorn kind of said, no, this is my daughter's chair, that would have been the end of it. He would have had to go find a different couple. But I think that was the test of, is he going to stand up for himself and his family, or is he going to roll over?
Well, and I think that's the powerful part about being a couple is like, we see Patrick compliment Bjorn and call him heroic, and Bjorn just smiles. And I was like, oh, there's almost like some homosexual tension here. There's something about it. And ultimately, I don't think it turned out romantic, but I think it was showing that Bjorn wanted attention. He wanted acknowledgement. And the couple played, again, strengths. Like, I think if Bjorn had shown a lot of interest in the wife, then that car scene would have been the wife and Bjorn. I think they would have played whatever angle it takes to separate the family. But Bjorn was just so desperate for attention and acknowledgement that Patrick could feed it to him. He could call him heroic. He could take him out to the salt mine and let him scream. It was so easy for him to break down his barriers.
And I want to build on that because I was going to say, let's flip the script a little bit and go to Louise's, is that her name? And Bjorn's relationship. They both felt, even though in front of everybody else, they were lovey and all that stuff. They showed a couple scenes to where they were standoffish to each other. Like, oh, we should go. No, I think we should order her these shoes. And then they had their daughter sleeping in their bed, which kind of, to me, made it a separation of, we can't do anything. Our daughter's here. And it kind of puts more on the relationship that there's no time to spend together because they were prioritizing the daughter over everything. And they both seemed like they didn't have certain points of happiness. Like when they walked outside and she screamed, just get out of here. So go, Josh.
I was going to say, also just building off of that is it just also seems like not only does he not know how to essentially fight for himself, but he doesn't know how to fight for the people that he loves and the people that he cares about, because we see it very early on. It's established that Louise's character is a vegetarian, and the first thing that he does when
it's offer pork,
he gives her boar, and instead of Bjorn basically being like, hey man, like, just as a reminder, like, my wife doesn't eat this stuff, like, thank you but no thank you kind of thing, like, he basically like encourages it. And I think you kind of see that throughout the course. Like there's also a point too where like Karen is like mothering Agnes, and you can tell that it's getting under Louisa's skin. Bjorn's not saying anything, and so you have that lack of just, kind of, again, to go off of what someone said earlier, like it's a very standoffish kind of thing. And maybe their marriage is just kind of one of those things that they've just kind of drifted apart.
And I'm going to be Patrick here. She eats fish, right? So isn't that a pescatarian?
Yes.
I had to. I love the fact that he did that.
There's so many different diet things like that, with like vegetarian, vegan, pescatarian. It's easier for a lot of them. I'll just tell you I'm a vegetarian, but I eat fish. That's why I got that. That's why she did that, is it's easier to explain it like that. People have heard of vegetarians. Not nearly as many people have heard of pescatarians.
Or a flexitarian, which is a vegetarian that is a vegetarian 90% of the time, but will randomly eat meat when they're in the mood for it.
Cheater.
I just had brisket, beef tips, and rice. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to speak to what you were saying about their intimacy, even when they go to the pub or the bar or the backwoods spot they took them to, they dance and kiss, and Bjorn and Louise thought it was inappropriate. And in gaslighting them, they also were making them feel bad. And they said, "Oh, we're sorry. We're just a couple who love each other, and we're just dancing and kissing. Like, what's wrong with that?"
Exactly.
To further kind of drive that wedge that Bjorn and Louise don't.
Yeah, I don't know.
He to me kind of came across as almost like a broken man stuck in routines.
I mean, that's very possible, 100%. But going back to what Josh said, especially about like the intimacy, and you could tell there's almost kind of like that longing, like when they finally did have sex in the movie, there's almost kind of that longing that Louise had that she hadn't known for quite a while, because Agnes essentially like is crying out, mom, 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 and she wants to stay in this moment with her husband. So, and I've seen friends go up and down, and like I've known friends over the years that have gotten divorced because of lack of sex in marriage or a lack of intimacy. Like, And whether that's emotional intimacy, physical intimacy, or any type of intimacy, you know, intimacy in a marriage or any relationship, like it is a key on whether or not it's going to be a make or break. And some couples don't do PDA. That's cool. Some do and know how to, like, you know, dial it in around it. It's just know who your company is and know what they can take.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some friends that have gone and it starts out really great, and then, you know, you'll go back and talk to them and they're like, yeah, we're together, we're married, but we're basically roommates. And it's more of a friendship, or we're staying together for the kids or something like that, versus the intimacy and everything being there and them being truly happy.
Yeah, if it's a social commentary about not just like etiquettes and politeness, but boundaries.
Yeah.
I mean, at least for me and my wife, when we had a kid, like we lost all sense of that boundary, right? Like it starts out as this little potato that cries and it can die very easily. And your whole life is about sustaining that life and growing that life. And then they start to get a personality and they start to become their own person. And you have to refine those boundaries. You know what I mean? You have to refine, like we said, like how much time you spend with your kid versus your spouse, or, you know, we're talking about where a lot of relationships become roommates because maybe they never put that priority back into it. And I mean, that was definitely this with Agnes. I mean, like we said, the bunny is a proof that there's no boundary on what the kid gets or doesn't get.
Yep.
Sleeping in the bed at a certain age is not necessarily unhealthy, but it makes it impossible for them to be intimate, to the point, like you said, they're in a stranger's home and they're having an intimate moment and they're like, finally, for once, she'll be fine. And I think that's another hard part about the movie is it's not that they did everything wrong. You know, even when they started to find their own personal boundary, they found it in the worst place, at the serial killer's house. But they had a moment, you know. I mean, there was this like silver lining of it. This wasn't at a serial killer's house. You actually maybe would have made some progress in life.
Yeah. So, no, I got a question though. At the end, towards the end, Patrick's in a pool. Is it the same pool, the same place where he got Agnes and Louisa and Bjorn? Is that his breeding ground?
That was a question for me too, because with the amount of pictures, I thought, one, like, what does his like tourist points look like at this resort? And two, like you said, like when we talk about the network with Habajid and stuff like that, is like, is someone at the resort in on it too? Like, you know, like,
I was
again,
thinking the same thing.
if it's a social commentary, then we can just ignore it. We don't have to figure it out. But as a standalone movie, that was my question, same as you, is like, how many people disappeared and did they all disappear from the same resort? Like, let's start asking questions.
Yeah. I would like to think that maybe it is that, or maybe they kind of like cycle through, like, you know, different resorts, because I think it would be kind of dumb if you went back to the same resort. And what happens if you still have the same staff there? They're like, wait a minute, these people are not Agnes's parents. Like,
Right.
you know, so you kind of go through that. And
But is
that
it another
process as well.
commentary on the boundaries and the politeness? Like,
Touche.
like you've met a guy
Touche.
who is so bold that you don't think he should live, and he's like 100 years old, and you're like, how has he just went through life this way? So I don't know. Like you said, in terms of believability, I want to believe it's a different resort. But if it's the commentary about, like, if you've got enough balls and confidence, you can just push through anything, going back to that same resort and owning it every time.
Yeah, that's
You've
fair.
also got to remember, through them resorts, the sheer amount of people that go through them. It's going to be
Yeah.
hard to remember one that shows up every 6 months, every once a year or something.
Fair.
Yeah. But at the same time, I'm going to flip it a little bit, make it a little bit darker. What about that resort is involved in trafficking? And they're looking the other way because they're the ones trafficking, and Patrick knows it and uses it as blackmail to use that as his breeding ground.
You're reading into it at this point.
I mean, honestly, I wouldn't throw that possibility out. For one. For two, going back to something that Josh said, like, I think this movie also, you know, looking at it from a social commentary point of view, like, how many of us will, you know, do we actually see something go wrong in the world and we say nothing? You know, because
Right.
we just kind of keep our head down and go on. Like, there's a story, I think it was from like New York in the 80s, where in the alleyway, numerous neighbors watched a woman get raped, didn't say anything. You know, just stood there and essentially let it happen. And I think that kind of goes back to some of the things that this film speaks on is we encounter terrible things literally every day. How much of us are actually saying something, or be turning the other cheek? Are we choosing to be kind of just polite and just kind of go on with our day, or are we willing to ruffle some feathers, have uncomfortable conversations, and maybe even confrontations?
Yeah, because most people won't say anything to not break the status quo. But the reason why I was asking if the town, even though they're separated, was involved, because when they go shopping, if they take a different kid every time, if it's a small town, you're going to notice.
That's fair. Maybe they have like a town, like a list of towns that they just kind of cycle through.
Well, that was
Maybe.
the thing about like the pub too, is I thought, okay, they're in the middle of nowhere. This is a small restaurant pub that they know intimately. They know the bartender by name. I was surprised that he let Bjorn pay, or that he kind of forced him into paying, because in my mind, logically, well, there's a credit card trail. They're going to find this place. The cops are going to find it. But
Right.
in a social commentary way, it just shows you how far he can push him. That you can literally bring him out, you order dinner, and then you make the other guy pay.
Yeah.
And it makes it look like they wanted to pay and they were there as friends and it was a friendship and all that, versus him manipulating him to do what he wanted.
Well, it just goes back to when he said, "I did it because you let me."
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that credit card scene is like probably the dinner scene is one of the most uncomfortable scenes in this entire
Yes.
movie. Because I don't know, man. I would hate to be that guy that essentially, was invited out and then got stuck with, a hefty bill. Like, because he like looks at the bill and goes, "Oh, someone was very generous," or something to that extent, and now you're stuck with your credit card and your dick in your hand. And you're just like, what do I do now?
How many videos do you see now of groups arguing over bill, where they go out and a couple people will order reasonably for their budget and everybody else orders big stuff, and then they want to split the bill evenly between everybody?
Right. I've seen
It's
that a
the same
lot.
kind of thing. Yeah, it's the same kind of thing.
No, we don't need to do that.
But again, that like speaks to the quality of writing. Like you said,
Yep.
that like some of these are absurd, but then some of them you're like, I don't know. I know a guy that's like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't think he's a killer, but like, okay, I can now again empathize with this couple because they're in a weird spot.
Right.
Yeah, and I feel like also too, like the older I get, and like the different types of like friends that I've made, or like people that I encounter, and like you said, like you meet people that might not necessarily be like outright, killers or into human trafficking, or kidnapping, or any of the dark things that Patrick and Karen go through, but definitely have like those traits that are just kind of there. And how many of us are actually willing to speak up and actually say something about it, or do we just kind of go with the flow?
Yeah. I mean, we haven't hit it already, so I'm going to go back to the conversation we had with Leo at the table. You want to start it?
No, you can go.
Okay. So basically in that part of the area, the stoning and all that is didn't he say it was very common or very believable, I guess? I can't remember his exact words, but
Pretty sure he said it was very common.
yeah. So basically he's thinking that I don't want to say whitewashed it a little bit, but whitewashed it. And it was because it can be very racist over there. And that could have been part of the theme of in the background, and they kind of changed it up a little bit, because that's one of those things that you really try to avoid talking about. We went over some of this stuff because after watching his movies, we talked about how certain people could do one thing and certain people can't. And that was one of those things, was dealing with racism and everything, how it's not as acceptable for certain people to do the racism as it is for it to be written another way and perceived a different way based on who's acting and who's in front of the screen.
Yeah, just kind of building off of that as well. For context, we are addressing the Leo in question is Leo X. Robertson.
Yes.
Him and Tom Montgomery, we did a special curation of their films this past Saturday. Thank you to everyone that came out. But they're by trade, they're from Norway, so they have some familiarity with a lot of this territory than any of us have. And specifically what he talked about was, and what Billy's referring to when he says whitewashing, is it's originally he predicted it to kind of be one of the cultures versus like Muslim extremists, I believe.
I believe that's what it was.
But this movie is also very like there's so much, and this goes back to our earlier point of the conversation of this movie being remade. Also, I think there's so much of like the Danish culture enriched in this movie, whether it is that sequence where they are in the car coming back from the restaurant and Patrick's listening to the music, or the different programs that they have throughout the course of this. Like, there's so much of that culture that's ingrained into this movie, and kind of I could definitely see that a lot more of those like culture wars and a lot more of that like cultural tension kind of present in this movie.
It's also so funny to think that he's like, we have good pop music in the Netherlands. Have you heard it? Can you imagine that scene now, since the host family and the remake's going to be British? He's like, hey, have you heard British music before? Like, I just don't think it's going to hit. I think he's gonna be like, yeah, I've heard of that band before. Ed Sheeran, nice. Yeah, Ed Sheeran's pretty good. Yeah.
Well, or you can ride around with Josh, listen to Spice Girls. We'll be good.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, like you said, like even like the stoning, it's almost like a biblical punishment. Like I don't think I've really seen a stoning in something, and it's like it's so cold and impersonal in the way that like they're doing it from a distance, but also like the way he's just picking them up, like he's just chucking them in a fucking lake. Like, I mean, it was so jarring to me because they obviously take some pride or passion in doing this thing. And even after he finishes stoning him to death, Corinne just like leans up against him. Like there's this almost like relief, you know, like, oh, we did it, you know, like a very intimate moment with them at the scene of a murder.
Well, I mean, they did it as a couple.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
It was a couple strengthening exercise.
I was going to say, even in that stoning, there's another aspect you can look at it is Patrick and Karen are above Jorn and Louisa, where they're like, we don't have any jobs, we don't work. That, to me, it was like, you're not better than we are, and this is our way of showing it. It doesn't matter because I don't have a job and everything doesn't make you better. You're we're not beneath you.
I believe it's also in a country that doesn't have access to guns like we do.
See, and I worry that they're going to change that scene. I'm not saying they are, but if they change that scene when they do the remake, or if they have changed it because the remake's already done, that could change some of the story a lot right there. Just that little scene.
Well, if the new ones, if it's taking place in Britain, it's the same way. They have a ton of restrictions, and it's not like the States.
Well, I think it's also one of those things where, like, again, after watching it, I'm like, all right, did everyone see what I just saw? And a lot of the criticisms were what I see in every horror movie, and I'm sure you guys too, where someone's just like, if that was me, I would have killed him with my shoelaces. Like, there's people that are just so sure it could never happen to them, and they completely ignore fight, flight, and freeze. And I mean, and Patrick just completely freezes. Like, Louise is losing her mind in the back seat because her daughter is gone. Or Jorn, I'm sorry. And Jorn is just in the front seat, frozen. Just absolutely stricken with it. It's the same reason, like why would you take your clothes off and wander out into the cold? And it's like, they were so defeated. They were so overwhelmed with stimulant, and they just shut down, and they were just lambs to the slaughter. And unfortunately, that happens. That happens a lot. I mean, like when we take like historical atrocities, and people will say, how did that happen? And there's just this fear of flight or freeze. And when people fall into flight or freeze, it's just game over.
Yeah.
And see, when they took their daughter, like you're talking about the car scene towards the end, right? When they took her, I took it as part of what Patrick had already told him in front of the car before they got in of, you better stay in line or we're going to hurt your family. So part of me thought, well, he thought he was protecting his family, by not doing anything, which was making it worse.
He kind of seemed defeated, and she just seemed like she accepted what was coming.
Mm-hmm.
To an extent, yeah. Like most of the time, like I feel like I would complain about the fact that there's not you don't get to see like this dynamic development of their characters to where he becomes like this like last minute hero in the end. Like what I feel like really grounds this movie and makes it so terrifying is that the way that you see Bjorn throughout literally the entirety of the film is the exact way that he dies. And the same for, you could even say the same for Louise. Like that's what makes it absolutely so terrifying, is the fact that all of this stuff literally could happen and would play out almost the exact same way that we see in these 98 minutes.
Well, it's also like you were talking, Billy, about rewatching it. Corinne says to Louise when they're working in the garden, these damn scissors are so dull. And those are the scissors she uses to cut out Agnes's tongue.
Mm-hmm.
So like when we talk about a lack of care, when we talk about like just how maniacal, like she shows Louise the weapon before Louise ever knows it's going to be used. And even in that moment, she couldn't process it. But you as the viewer can go, those are the dull scissors. It wasn't surgical. It wasn't plain. I mean, even if they're the scissors they use, there's just some wanton abandonment there. Just this is the tool when it's rudimentary, and we have no interest in your comfort. This is not about Agnes's well-being. This is not about a clean cut. This is our dull pairs of scissors from the garden. Yeah. So again, like that writing was excellent. That is just absolute dread throughout the whole film. And like you said, when you go back and look again, you're like, oh, those scissors, cool.
Yeah. In a way, I'm going to be honest. In a way, in that scene, especially rewatching it, I'm thinking, hit her with the damn rake already. Just hit her with the rake. So,
and it still comes down to one thing: damn kid and her bunny.
Oh, I was going to say it doesn't even matter how hard you try. So,
oh Lord.
Just do what is it, 100-hour countdown clock for this podcast? It doesn't air at the time. The Linkin Park countdown.
Little glitches, and then it just starts counting up. It'll never release. Well, I think that's gonna do it for us. Unless there is anything else you guys feel like we didn't touch on, or anything else that you guys want to talk about real quick.
I'm good.
I'm good.
I want to appreciate you recommending this for me. Because again, it's one of those movies where I'm glad you did, because I had not watched it yet. So I went in really blind. And two, I do still appreciate a lot of movies that can bring dread out like that, because like that's the power of cinema, right? Whether it's happy or sad or romantic or scary, when a movie can make you feel. And there's definitely spots in that movie where I like felt for them. I was frustrated for them. I was not looking forward to what was coming. So although I will not rewatch this movie again in the next week, I do feel confident when people talk about this remake to encourage them to watch the original. Because it definitely put an impression on me.
That's literally been my entire thing coming up. Like I was talking with a friend of mine today, and he was like, "Oh, I can't wait for this." And I'm like, "Dude, you got to go watch the original, because the original, like, there's just this atmosphere and this culture of dread that this movie is just woven with." And yeah, there are these like funny moments that are kind of that just kind of exist, but you're laughing more because it's awkward and you don't really know what other response you're supposed to give. And I think this movie does a really good job at just kind of, like you said, like making you feel for these characters where you're like, oh shit, I've been there, or I felt this way, or how could they do that? And this movie just invokes such a response from you as the viewer, and I feel like it's really rare that we don't see a lot of movies that invoke a lot of emotion the way that this one does, and that's the reason why this one really sticks with me.
And I mean, I feel like this movie is one of those, it doesn't feel like outrageous. It feels like kind of, well, crap, that could really happen if nobody's paying attention.
Yeah. So pay attention.
Yeah.
Josh.
Speak up.
Yeah.
If you see something, Well, that's going to do it for us on this episode of Abyss Gazing. But Josh, where can people find you and find more information about False Sense?
Yeah, all the normal social media. We're all chained to it. False Sense probably is most active on Instagram. And like every good hardcore band, the best way to find out about us and learn more is go to a show. We're playing 6-8 songs, and we've only got 2 out. Putting out an EP probably by the end of the year with 5 or 6 of them. And we're already 3/4 away through writing the second EP. So we're just going to keep putting out music, but you're going to see a show way quicker than you're going to see an album.
Awesome. Billy, where can we find you online?
Of course, you can find me on Letterboxd at VABoy99.
And Mark?
Being a slacker is normal. Painting miniatures at Instagram, Titanium Juggernaut Painting.
All right. Well, you guys can find me. I am also on the Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia. But if you guys just kind of building off of what Josh was saying, you guys can once again, they're going to be doing False Sense is going to be playing a show that we're putting together this November 16th at Garden Grove. It's got a great lineup: Nerva, False Sense, No Treaty, Plead the Widow's Cause, Wine and War Paint, Half Past Dead, stand-up comedy from Chauncey Joe, and spoken word poetry from Micah Kimber. All of the details can be found at victimsandvillains.net/events. But you guys can also check out Abyss Gazing wherever you guys get your podcast from. Hit subscribe. And also, you guys can follow our parent company, Victims and Villains. We are on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and wherever you guys get your podcasts from. And if you want to support our mental health education efforts, you can go to patreon.com/victims and villains, all of which you guys can find in the show notes below. But until next week, where Surprise September continues, until next time, remember, the longer that you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes back into you.
If your God requires life from the honor